The tragedy in Aleppo is developing fast, and there have been multiple significant shifts in the situation on the ground over just the past 24 hours. And so in this video, we're going to attempt to catch you up on all that's been happening just since the video coverage that we did yesterday of what was going on in Syria. So first of all, the actual military conflict between the two groups had largely wrapped up by this point yesterday. That had transitioned over into sporadic combat, more so mass executions, atrocities, and the sorts of things that we both covered on the show yesterday. And also there are any number of really unbelievable and incredibly heartbreaking videos and photos and interviews, bits of information coming out over social media of the situation in Aleppo. Just you hear about women committing mass suicides to avoid being raped by Assad's military forces when they go in, some people killing themselves and their families to avoid being executed in more horrible fashion when the territory is taken over by Assad's forces. Some of that information is anecdotal, but a lot of it appears to have a heavy dose of confirmation, and the situation there is brutal. But as I said, the actual combat had largely ended, and this is being confirmed by multiple sources. So according to the UN ambassador from Russia, over the last hour we've received information, this is yesterday, that the military activities in East Aleppo have stopped. It has stopped. The Syrian government has established control over East Aleppo. The UN Secretary General said, "We appear to be witnessing nothing less than a total uncompromising military victory." And the UN categorized the situation after the close of the more formal combat as a complete meltdown of humanity, as I alluded to earlier on. The British UN ambassador described it as going from siege to slaughter, as the ostensible destruction of the rebel forces in that area transitioned over to seemingly attempting to kill as many people as possible. It was described by the U.S. ambassador this way: Aleppo will join the ranks of those events in world history that define modern evil, that stain our conscience decades later, and alluded to other great massacres from throughout just recent history in most of these cases. Now we have Aleppo to add to that list. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights said this: "The crushing of Aleppo, the immeasurably terrifying toll on its people, the bloodshed, the wanton slaughter of men, women, and children, the destruction, and we are nowhere near the end of this cruel conflict." Well, as of yesterday evening, that combat had shifted over into a tense ceasefire that was believed to be set up so that there could be a movement of mostly remaining civilians, well over 10,000, or in some counts more than that, people out of the tiny bit of still ostensibly controlled by rebel forces Aleppo, in eastern Aleppo. That evacuation was supposed to begin at dawn, but shelling resumed in the morning hours, and buses meant to be used in the pullout of rebels and civilians returned to their depots empty. Witnesses on the ground said that aircraft resumed bombing shortly after noon. Some shells fell near and around the one remaining hospital in the 1 square mile enclave that the rebels still hold. We have this description, and this is truly tragic, from the head of forensics in that area. Said, "People have left their shelters to be ready for the evacuation. I can't describe it. Since the morning, they started to target the areas where people have gathered. These people were walking to the crossings designated for exit." And so that ceasefire had been breached almost instantaneously. Now, the Assad regime and their allies, including both Iran and Russia, said that the reason that it had been breached was that they demanded that some of their forces be allowed to evacuate out of some of the villages in the outskirts of Aleppo and around Aleppo. That could well be true, but it also serves their purposes to breach the ceasefire for whatever rationale they want. And the quotes coming out of Assad are, "These people, all of them, are terrorists or those who toy with terrorism, and we're not going to stop in our fight to destroy the terrorists."
Yeah, so as we told you, our rampant use of the word terrorism has now rendered it moot. Every single government in the world is using the word terrorism against their opponents, whether they are democratic governments or dictatorial governments, whether their opponents are actually attacking civilians or they're not attacking civilians. It doesn't matter. Anyone opposed to the government is now a terrorist. So, of course, the dictator Assad would also be saying that about his opponents as he brutalizes them in what appears to be historic proportions.
Yeah.
And so, as I told you yesterday about the United Nations, here they're a conservative group, meaning that they do not want to anger any of the nation states, especially the powerful ones, including Russia, and certainly including the United States. So they have to balance that out. But it is part of their job to do human rights. And so as they look at this, they can't help but say, yes, there's confirmation that civilians are being massacred here, that it's a slaughter.
And we don't know for sure the planes that have resumed the bombing, we don't know for sure if they're Syrian government jets or if they're Russians.
And I guess this is Donald Trump's ideas coming to fruition, or his dreams coming true. Because remember, he said, I want to kill the family members of the terrorists. Now, he never clarified how he would figure out who the terrorists were or who their family members were. Now his buddy Putin is killing the family members. Do we know that they're family members of terrorists? Of course not. But they were in that city, and my guess, and this is now a guess, is as to why the Russians and the Syrians broke the ceasefire, is because the ceasefire said that the rebels would be allowed to withdraw. Now the civilians are leaving at the same time, but they think, who cares? I'm already killing civilians, and and why not kill families while we're at it? So I'll bomb the guys on their way out. So maybe I'll kill some rebels along the way, and if I kill civilians, I don't really care because my hands are already so drenched in blood. What difference would it make?
Yeah.
So I'm not saying this to you to take any specific action. I'm not in the camp of, okay, then we have to intervene, or we have to do ground troops, or we have to shoot down Russian planes, or whatever things that people talk about, right? We're just bringing you the news of what happened here, and it is disastrous.
Yeah, and it's being described, the most recent attempts to wipe out civilians are being described by the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights this way. While the reasons for the breakdown in the ceasefire are disputed, the resumption of extremely heavy bombardment by the Syrian government forces and their allies on an area packed with civilians is almost certainly a violation of international law and most likely constitutes war crimes. Now, there are also reports coming out in just the past 90 or so minutes that it is believed that the ceasefire can resume for whatever that's worth, because we saw what it was worth last night. And I think this is the first time in video that I've talked about this situation. It's something both in Aleppo and in Syria generally that we've talked about any number of times on TYT. I remember last year I did a final judgment talking about a drone footage that was taken for a drone flying through, I believe it was Aleppo at that point. And it didn't look like a city that was in the process of being destroyed. It looked like a city that had been destroyed in a war 200 years ago and had simply laid waste since then. And the stories that have been coming out over the past few days as the siege has continued, as the forces have moved in, neighborhood by neighborhood, it's like what I remember reading from some of the worst sieges in World War II or wars of that time, like reading about the starvation in Leningrad and people being forced to kill themselves to not die in more horrible ways. And it's going on right now. And there's blame to go around in almost every group, and even differentiating between the various groups composing the larger rebel groups of various forms. They come in all different shapes and sizes, from relative moderates to hardcore jihadists, those who are being assisted by foreign powers, those who aren't, those who are affiliated with al-Qaeda or ISIS or other groups or none. It's a complicated mess. But for the civilians who are trapped through no fault of their own inside of the cities and are bearing the true brunt of the Syrian and Russian and Iranian attempts to wipe them out, this is historic evil being perpetrated against them.
So in the midst of this, we have a president-elect who said that he would figure out the difference between the Sunni and the Shia once he got into office. He said that during the election season.
Yeah.
Well, you better figure it out quick, because it is the Sunnis being massacred in this case. It is largely being done by Shia. There are a great number of different factions within the Sunnis, some faction within the Shia. Do you think Donald Trump is up to the job of figuring out who's who? I guarantee you that if a reporter asked him about this today, and could somehow ask him, because he's canceled his press conferences and hasn't done one since June, hey, who are the Russians attacking in Aleppo? He would probably say ISIS, when that is not the case. The rebel forces are in Aleppo are not ISIS. ISIS's headquarters are elsewhere. These rebels are supported by some of our allies. And again, some are closer to al-Qaeda, and I'm not saying any of them, of the rebel forces in Syria, I'll vouch for them. Hell no. I don't. It is very hard to determine who's done what and who they are aligned with. And then there are ones that are theoretically more moderate, as John pointed out. But some of our allies, like Turkey and Israel, seem to be backing the Sunnis in this fight, who just got destroyed in Aleppo.
Yeah, Turkey was one of the parties that helped to get the ceasefire back earlier today.
So,
or in the very near future, anyway.
Do you think Donald Trump is going to favor our allies like Turkey and Israel, or is he more likely to say, what does my friend Putin say? I mean, I've got ExxonMobil's got a $500 billion deal to make with them, and that's why I put my Secretary of State as the CEO of ExxonMobil. And here's a guy who actively, according to our CIA, helped me to win the election. Who cares what our allies say? Who cares what's happening to civilians? And the last question I'd like a reporter to ask him is, hey, you said that family members should be killed. And so now family members are being killed in Aleppo. Are you happy? Is this the kind of fight against so-called terrorism that you approved of?
Yeah.
The Syrian government and your allies in Russia called these people in Aleppo terrorists and kill their family members. So are you thrilled about the results? Because it was your policy idea.
And this is definitely a situation, the final thought for me, this is definitely a situation where I think we're going to have a clear reminder of the value of expertise and experience in extremely important government positions. I mean, I've been doing as much research as I can to figure out some of the current dynamics going on in all these different groups. And I have previous graduate level experience in international politics and comparative politics. And even for me, it is a mess. That's why there are people who are experts in exactly this situation that are going on. And so very soon, we're going to have a new Secretary of State who's going to come in and be expected to manage this situation. And he doesn't know the first thing about international diplomacy or those, or Syria specifically. He has experience in oil. That's all he has. He's never expressed any interest in politics or governance. And yet, we have a president who is brought into power on people who don't think that expertise or study is worth anything.
Rex Tillerson, apparently our new Secretary of State, literally received a medal from Putin a couple of years ago. You think he's going to defy Putin? He's the one that signed the $500 billion deal with Putin. You think he's going to defy Putin? No. He's about to walk away with $150 million from ExxonMobil, and God knows what he'll get from them in the future. You think he's going to say no to Putin because he's concerned about civilian deaths in Aleppo? No, no. They sold our government away in wholesale corruption. So the answer to Aleppo, yes, is difficult to determine. You know, whether you are confused as to whether we should support the Free Syrian Army or the Army of Conquest, two different rebel forces in Aleppo, I understand that. You would really hope that your president would do a little bit better than you in knowing the differences, that his intelligence community, which he now actively refuses to listen to, would do a little bit better than all of us in knowing who those factions are and who we should support and who we shouldn't support. And the one thing that I hope we can all agree on is that we should do our best to spare the civilians. But that is what we thought before this election. That's what we thought America stood for. After this election, I don't know what we stand for, and I don't know what our government will do and what it will sanction.
Yeah.
But we're about to find out. You know who makes independent media possible? You guys. Because of you, we can actually do this show free of any outside influence. That's what makes us so strong. Become a member today. tytnetwork.com/join. You are the media.